Hello. Thank you for coming. My name is Gabriela Rangel. I'm here with Amanda de la Garza and Thyago Nogueira. I'm going to say brief words about their trajectories, starting with Amanda. Amanda de la Garza is a Mexican curator and historian. She was appointed recently Artistic Deputy Director of the Museo Nacional Centro de Arte Reina Sofia in Madrid. Previously, she was the head of visual arts at UNAM and director of MUAC, Museo Universitario de Arte Contemporáneo, which is the biggest museum in Mexico City and probably in Latin America. Amanda has a BA in sociology, an MA in social anthropology. From 2012 and 2019, she was adjunct curator at MUAC, She made curatorial projects in Colombia, Argentina, Mexico, Chile, Spain, and USA. And she also won an award as an emergent curator, an important award. Now with Thyago. Thyago is the head of contemporary photo at the Moreira Salles Institute, which is a very important collection, as you know, based in two cities in Brazil, Sao Paulo and Rio. He's also the editor and founding editor of Zoom magazine, which is around, can you show it? Well, we don't have it here. Anyway, Zoom magazine, which is produced by Instituto Moreira Salles as well. He curated the exhibition Claudia Andujar, The Yanomami Struggle, Daido Moriyama, Miguel Rio Branco, and so on. He's very known as a curator of photography, and I want to start presenting, can we? Some projects that talk about the invisibility of the image, how an image, first of all, I want to thank Paris Photo for this invitation because I jumped the thanks, and also Elena Navarro for making this possible. Elena Navarro curated the section Voices. Hi, Elena. And I want to talk about what we don't see in the image and that escape the image and goes back to different projects. I'm going to talk about the generation of artists who started with these problems with pre-digital photography, and now a younger generation of curators and researchers put in different situations that are not necessarily reduced to photography. They go elsewhere. They communicate in different ways. I think photography has been also collaborating with other media. And those are the projects that I want to talk about. This is Fallo Fotográfico, 1981, during the dictatorship, Eugenio Dittborn, who is a very well-known contemporary artist from Chile, put together this book and this project is larger than a book, in which he asked, what is a photography? But he asked, what is a photography, not to experts in photography, not to curators, to photographers, but to every single person who has seen the image and who has manipulated the image. And also he put together The Dream of Walter Benjamin, which is a compilation of quotations about photography, which is a beautiful project, but also in this very cheap, easy to do format, you know, with photocopies, with the transference of the image, which is also part of the photomechanic, you know, process. So it's a very beautiful, you know, homage to photography. This is the first one. The second one took place in Caracas. This is, it's Cámara Lúcida by Alfredo Jar. And if you see here a bunch of, you know, disposable cameras from Kodak, Alfredo Jar went to one of the shanty towns in Venezuela where there was a museum. That museum doesn't exist anymore, but he had the brilliant idea to reverse, you know, the dream of the family of man and to give the camera to a community for them to photograph according to their own criteria. He created several criteria for people to play with they could follow or not follow, but they were given a camera and they will return the camera, they will process the photo, and the museum will organize it accordingly to those criteria. This is Milagros de la Torre, who also play with invisible forces, dealing with one of the most complicated phenomena in probably colonial situations, which is racism. And she, in her very first project, Bajo el Sol Negro, made it from 91 to 93. She found the minuteros, the minute photographers of the street. And then she saw that they applied mercuriocromo. What is a translation for mercuriocromo? It's like a wand. It's something that it's red that you apply to a wound. And anyway, and that chemical created white skin in the people who were, taking portraits by these very cheap photographers in the plaza. So this is a project about racism. Then Bajo el Sol Negro, she found the photographs discarded during trials that were never resolved, crimes that were never resolved, and they deal with the poverty and the conditions of inequality in Lima, in Peru. And then Censura, that's Los Pasos Perdidos, a project from '96. You don't see that in the image. The image is very mysterious, but that's there. Then Censurados, which is, there is a missing number there. It's from 2001. It's a piece dealing with the Archivo de Indias in Spain, where, these books were censored during the colonial times for many reasons. And here we have one of my favorite projects and the most unknown probably by Paz Errázuriz, who is a photographer who is represented at the Voices section of the fair, a very well-known photographer from Chile. And the very first project that she made was Amalia, which was a book that doesn't have classification. You cannot say that it's a book for children or for adults or a storytelling. It's a very complicated project in which she projected the fears of someone who was trapped by the dictatorship in Chile and created this fantastic, everyday life situation with a hen, her hen in her own garden. She was not a photographer at the time, and this book allowed her to decide that she was not going to be a professor. She was going to be a photographer. This is Amalia. Hi. Ah. Sorry, it's very heavy. Hi. No, it's not. They changed it. Anyway. Okay. I'm going to leave you with Amanda de la Garza. Amanda is going to talk about these invisible forces in a modernist photographer who rejected the category surrealist, but even though he was still called that way. Thank you.
Oh, bonsoir. Bueno, muchas gracias, Gabriela. Thank you very much, Gabriela, and it's wonderful to be with you and Thyago, and thank you again to Elena for this invitation and for Paris Photo and to Paris Photo. Well, about this provocation that it's in the title of this talk, What Photography Hides, I was thinking of how we can rethink modern legacy coming from Mexico that, of course, has a very strong modernist legacy in terms of photography. So there is one image which is very well known, that it's called in Spanish La Buena Fama Durmiendo, and in French La Bonne Renommée Endormie. the Manuel Alvarez Bravo, who's like, as you know, a very, very famous, iconic Mexican photographer. And and also this image is iconic in terms of being like the symbol of Mexican surrealism, so to speak, in photography, despite what already Gabriela has said, that he didn't believe himself or thought himself as a surrealist artist, but rather just portraying reality in Mexico. But what is really interesting, and it is shown here in the fair, is that for the first time there has been some images printed from this series or these like shots, and what happens in those images is that they're not only she's in different poses, but also she's being kind of playing a little bit with the camera. The model that was used to be like a model for other artists at the time. And so that made me think a lot of course, the notion of the invisibility in photography, but not only that, not just in a formal way, but rather when the subject that is portrayed appears, and of course this has been discussed in anthropology and in photography for a long time, but I think nowadays with this conversation about identity, it becomes very present and very important to discuss this, about the performativity of the subject and the performativity that entails a relationship between the photographer and the person who is being photographed. And in that sense, is when we see these other photographs that have been not yet or have been not well known before, you know, a few years, and now, like where the model is actually having a different role than this woman that is portrayed sleeping, which is one really important topic in photography and in modernist photography and in painting, of course. And so we can go to the next one. So I wanted to link this topic to another very important Mexican photographer, Maya Godet, who has been working for a very long time and who did a very long-term series. The other photography is from 1938, and which is La Plaza de la Soledad, that it's like a neighborhood in Mexico City where there is a group of very poor sex workers that live under very precarious conditions. So she did a very long essay, a photographic essay with these women from this community, and especially portraying some very intimate moments of their life. And this has become a book, and it works as a book. And also Maya has done a very interesting movie, documentary film with the sex workers there, and sharing about their lives. The book also has interviews. So I was really reflecting on how, in this case, the relationship with this community, which being historically for documentary photography, showing these hidden spaces, the unknown, the photographer as the one that is discovering this world that we don't have access to, and that is building these sort of bridges. But now we can think of a different direction or focus or center to this interpretation of this sort of work or images, where we can focus more, or we can ask ourselves, how does it work, the performativity between, as I've said, these subjects that live in a precarious situation, that live marginalized from society and economically, and in terms of gender as well, in very violent surroundings, and subject to gender and economical and political violence, and how this plays in, and how this can convey a different relationship between being just portrayed as these marginalized subjects, but rather more of this interaction between the photographer and the subject that is photographed. And for me, of course, it's from these different moments. For example, we can see in this photograph, it's a very aged woman who's a sex worker, who is still working as a sex worker, and that have this man that that they've been together in a relationship for a very long time, and you can of course see this very intimate and moment, no? But at the same time, it's kind of a complex image, since he's also like a client, not just like kind of a lover, but they've been together or in this sort of relationship for the last 40 years. And this is other moments, for example, the first communion, the religious, you know, like celebration of the daughter of one of the sex workers, and different scenes of them and with a child. And this is another image from a very different context, which is a singer, artist, and actress, Mexican, that was trained as an artist and is one of the first transgender women that actually, you know, became publicly transgender, and that have been very active politically since the 80s. She studied in one of very important art school in Mexico City in the 70s, and he has between a very strong relationship with the world of cabaret and also TV shows, but at the same time a very strong relationship to contemporary art and to the art world as we know it. And in this sense, nowadays she's kind of getting more recognition as an artist, but also through her archive. Some of these images are collaborations between other artists or photographers as Adolfo Patiño or Yolanda Andrade, that in different moments have taken portraits of her, or different moments of her acting and singing and performing career. And also this archive and this kind of trying to rescue the archive, and she's still alive of her life, and that it's also deposited as images in some other example that Thyago will address. That is the in Spanish is Archivo de la Memoria Trans, which is an initiative that was founded in Argentina by a trans community, trying to recuperate the archives of trans communities, since they have, of course, been politically harassed, socially harassed by in that case, by the dictatorship in Argentina, long-term dictatorship. And they did this initiative in terms of collecting and rescuing the archives of trans people and trans lives, and that this initiative has spread it along throughout all Latin America. And in this case, the archive of Terry Holiday, it's also in this archive. So in this sense, with this idea of the performativity of the image, I was thinking that precisely that she's taking empowerment in her own archive and in this relationship with other photographers that have portrayed her, how the archive also becomes a tool not only of empowerment, but of performativity, of this life that, and also of how she, as a transgender woman, was wishing to be portrayed, to be shown, and this archive also kind of recollects in a way the memory of her life, but also of her work and of her, as well as her artistic work. We can see other images, part of the artwork she's doing, and this is the other photography that she did in collaboration with the documentary photographer Yolanda Andrade, and that it's mainly, you know, her life in of course in parties, in performances, in different moments of her life, and that kind of build up a narration that where she's putting down the strings in order to convey a narration about her life and the life she decided to have, and also of all these connections between her and the artistic world. And I was thinking that in a way it's a key concept that can allow us to read photography in a different way, and also of understanding the role of archives or personal archives in many ways that exist not only as museums or patrimonial museums, but also as artistic work. And I will leave it there so we can open up later on the discussion. Thank you.
Bonsoir. So I'm gonna present a little bit. Can you pass me? There is a presentation there. So I was thinking about the topic of this conversation, what photography hides, and really thinking about artists that have, created strategies to, let's say, unhide or to expose things that were invisible for different reasons, socio-politically and also thematically or even documentary. So in this case, so I brought some images of artists that I think are dealing especially with their identity, and some Brazilian artists that are looking at their own identity and the identity of the female identity or identity of women during dictatorship in Brazil, which was started in '64 and lasted until '85. So I was trying to see also artists that were looking at photography and not seduced by its descriptive documentary nature, really trying to bring different practices and different visibilities for photography, inventing new kinds of visual knowledge around the descriptive idea of photography. So in this case, it's Vera Chaves Barcelos, who's an important Brazilian artist, born in 1938, I think, and has been working for a long time, but in the 70s was very influential and was producing her own imprints of her images and looking at her own identity, and especially in the context of dictatorship that was persecuting artists, and all the police imagery that was being produced, trying to catch the identity of a certain person for imprisonment and for persecution. And Vera is printing herself in this thin slices of paper and then reprinting the photographic on the ampliador, how do you say that? Amplifier. Yeah, thank you so much. So in this case, for instance, Greta Safarte, which is a Greek-Brazilian artist, also looking at the identity of the women and its representation, its missing representation as a real character and identity in not only in the histories of photography, but also in advertisement and in social life in more general terms. And of course, there's a lot of connection with persecution, the horrors of dictatorship and things that were happening in Brazil at that moment. Looking at the body and really trying to find other ways to talk about self-identity and expression through inventing this different visual knowledge. Some work by Claudia Andujar, which is here at the fair, and the wonderful voice section, which is a little bit of an also unhidden strategy for Latin American production and other different countries and contexts. So also looking at how to represent the identity of a woman. In this case, she's photographing a model that didn't find job in 1970, and she photographed her, but she didn't like the direct photographs, and then decided to rephotograph them with a filter, a specific machine. It was very popular in the 70s, and reprocessed those images and actually published them, talking about her own identity as a woman and the colors of her soul and her expression. Or in this case, Teresa Margolles, a very important Mexican artist that is looking at the women that what you call feminicide, also the disappearance and the killing of women by photographing the posters that are put on the streets in search of those women that disappeared in Mexico for a long period of time. More than 7,000 women just were disappearing, and those posters that were left in the streets to represent and to call attention to that violence were rephotographed by Teresa in their real existence, very true and decaying existence. Or, for instance, Rosângela Renaud, who is amplifying images of protests and demonstrations in different contexts of dictatorship, but trying to find people who are caring, who are becoming themselves like a portrait stand. They're carrying images of other people that have disappeared in the multitude of people, and she's trying to find them and really magnify and amplify their presence in the image. And I think also I was thinking more modernly to kind of not only talk about historical Brazil, but a very important artist working in Brazil now, Rosana Paulino, who is looking at the presence and the representation of Afro-Brazilian women and colonial history and African women also that was brought to Brazil in the slavery period, and how that erasure is connected with 20th century Brazil in the association with the modernist utopia and the concrete and neo-concrete traditions. So really how this representation of, and also this utopic vision of Brazil as a modern country, the mestiçage and the mixed race would have worked in the modernist tradition, was a complete failure, and was actually erasing another layer of erasure to this representation of women, and especially Afro-Brazilian women in Brazil. And Rosangela is doing this kind of gravure printing. And I also wanted to, update that relation with the work of Val Souza, who is like a very young contemporary performer that is looking at the representation of Afro-Brazilian women in history and her own self-representation. So Val has built a 1,000 image panel where she's connecting images from the colonial Brazil and from different colonial context with her own self-portraiture, but also trying to understand exactly the agency and the relations that are implied in the images, and whether those colonial images can only be seen as violent images, or whether there are some kind of agency that you can understand, you can see in these images, in the women that are present in these images, through these very careful associations, with the poses and the gestures. You see, for instance, like someone that is, I'm not sure the word in English, or that has something in her mouth, and then she's, looking with other images where Afro-Brazilian women are smiling or, having little gestures with her mouth, and showing the importance of seeing the mouth and expressing their emotions through their mouth. Of course, she's also dealing with a lot of stereotypes and associations of the presence and the association of women and food and sexuality, sensuality, wilderness, a lot of cliches that are, produced in Brazil. And to update this a little bit, this is also a work by a very young artist working from Salvador, Mayara Ferrão, which is actually revisiting again the archives of colonial history in Brazil, but trying to build new images with artificial intelligence that speak to a different kind of affection, that also changes the way those repetitive carte de visite and typological images have been over and over used and reused, and the way they revive certain violence. So Mayara is really building new vocabulary, let's say, to understand those images and to be able to talk about the past in a very interesting way. And I just wanted also to connect in terms of when thinking of unhiding things to the possibility of revisiting the history of archives and of photography through this very, as Amanda was saying, counter histories and very independent initiatives that are looking at archives that are not present in the official institutional archives and official histories. So I think it's another subversive strategy to kind of unhide something, to really, in this case, as Amanda said, the archive of the trans memory in Argentina, which is a very important initiative that is gathering the history of trans women during dictatorship in Argentina by, whatever photograph is left with people that had to run away or sometimes were killed, and left a bunch of images with someone, and they're trying to retell the story of the persecution, but also the joy and the beauty of trans life in Argentina during dictatorship. And I really feel, coming from an institution that deals with archive, I think also the erasure that we have, imposed in the histories, can be counterbalanced in a way by these, very powerful initiatives. So currently, I'm also working with another initiative. These are projects that I've been working on either on the magazine or in the museum, and this is a new exhibition I'm preparing. which is an archive of indigenous people, a vernacular archive of indigenous people in Amazonia, who was contacted in 1969, very recently actually, by a non-indigenous society. And in few years they moved from shamanistic, very complex society to an evangelical indigenous society. And in the meantime, some photography was introduced by the missionaries, and they started to photograph also the new rituals, the weddings, the baptisms, and birthdays and everything. And this material was lost. Some people kept some images with them. And so now we're doing a project where we're going through these different villages and families, trying to find these images and trying to create a new narrative and a new story of their existence that is not, the story of what's presented in the institutional archives, because this is usually stories of travelers, of people that have just went there and expropriated their images, but really trying to find another way to tell that story through their own voices and their own images too. And I think I can stop here just to give a little idea of what we've been working on. And
yeah, thank you. I think both cases are fascinating, and there are overlappings in your approaches, which are really interesting. What happened after photography? That's my question to you guys, because or how do you deal with identity, feminism, the archive, human rights, LGBT, and all these issues that photography has to make alliances? The photographer has to, or the artist has to do something else. It's not only the image, because you talk, Thyago, for example, you talk about the Moreira Salles has a very important archive, as you mentioned, and the archive includes indigenous, archives, right? From people from the original communities. How do you deal with this? How do you produce an image that doesn't offend, that doesn't feel that you're excluding the subject, or you are refine the object, or are you manipulating, instrumentalizing, using extractivism, etc., etc.? How do you deal with those problems nowadays? You talk about unhiding, and Amanda talked about performativity. So I think those two lines can help us, solving this problem, right?
Yeah, maybe I can talk. I think this question is so important. We've been thinking a lot in the museum and the archive. I mean, IMS in Brazil has about 3 million images and has the whole history of Brazil's photography since the invention of photography in Brazil. And of course, part of that, history is colonial imagery and, all the 19th century photography that was produced in Brazil and about Brazil by, Brazilian people, but also by a lot of foreigners that traveled in Brazil. And we've been, thinking a lot on how to readdress this archive, because we just realized that the way this history has been presented, it excluded a lot of people. It, reinforced a lot of violences, and it didn't really do justice to the complexity and the diversity and the beauty of what we understand that we are as a country. And I think there is not a fixed answer for that. I think there are different strategies that we are trying to build around that. One for sure is this idea of building new archives that were not present, that were not institutional archives, that are independent initiatives that people can, and we can, I think with our experience also, with our knowledge about how to do archives, we can help produce and generate and moderate, but archives that will be actually not part of the institution. But we are also thinking about how to revisit the whole archive. I think this is one of the most interesting moments in the history of photography, that we have the chance to revisit the entire history by other paradigms, by other eyes, by other hands, by other voices. So it's really, at least in Brazil, I think it's a big revolution what's happening, which is bringing people who probably descend from the people who are represented in the archives to talk, to decide, to think about the archives with us and to repurpose and to give a new meaning to that archive that will actually enhance the complexity of the archives. It's not something that is not made with a lot of challenges, but I think it's something we're trying to do. I was mentioning quickly, we were just acquired in the museum the archive of Claudia Andujar that I showed quickly here, but probably maybe you know about her work, the Yanomami work. Yeah, there are some works in the Vermelho Gallery here downstairs. But now we're trying to think, I'm thinking of how to build a certain kind of laboratory with the Yanomami that they can become the catalogers and the archivists for her archive, that we don't need to see an archive organized by, you know, a certain genius artist that organizes the whole pyramid of understanding of the archive, but really how to keep this archive alive and being, you know, dynamic and dynamized by the people to whom it belongs to and of whom it represents, and also that needs those images to continue their story and enforce their visibility and their safeness, their protection in the world. So this is a little bit new strategies we're trying.
Well, I'm gonna speak not directly about photography as a first response. There's a non-binary historian in Mexico that he has studied very thoroughly the conquest, of Spaniards in Mexico, and not because the common way in how this has been told, at least, is that the vision of the ones that were conquest, that were overtaken, so to speak, or defeated in that sense. So in this book, that it's very relevant, he speaks about, without denying the barbarism of the conquest, which was very barbaric and violent, and led to a very structural, violent, and complicated society that it prevails nowadays in Mexico. But he also spoke a lot about resistance, how historically he could prove that there were many moments of resistance through like in everyday life, in the culture that was produced, in like the cultural field that was produced in the country or in the territories after the conquest. So for me, it was very enlightening in the sense of thinking about this notion of like post-colonial identities in a very different way, and how this, because I constantly ask myself if we nowadays are addressing the topic or in a way that is productive in this question of who can speak for who, and who an artist can speak for, and if only self-expression is the only way we can deal with this very complex problem of intersubjectivity and hierarchies of power. And of course, in photography, it has been like a main problem for many, many years. And of course, it's very relevant that we question the way it has been directed, or it has been normalized, that others can speak for others. But even me, like, who I can say it openly, I'm a brown person from Latin America, but from non high class background that studied.
Excuse me, but I'm gonna say something regarding that. I think white Cubans said, even if we are blue-eyed, white, blonde, we are black because we were born in this society. So we are all Latin American.
Yeah,
black.
Exactly. So, but what I was going to say is that for me, I don't think I can only speak about Latin American photography or Latin American art just because of my identity, my racial, so to speak, identity. So I always try to think how we can address these problems, even in understanding what was produced under another type of questions or frame, frames in documentary photography, precisely coming from a country and of a region that has a very strong, as I said before, tradition in documentary photography. And because, of course, the easy way of doing it is saying, okay, documentary photography is over, because it cannot nowadays bring the necessary visual representation we need for the political questions we have to address. But I think we still need to give it another thought, and try to understand how we can have a more open and complex conversation about this. And of course, it has to do with also with other initiatives, like Thyago was mentioning, of like you want to involve, for example, the Yanomami communities in Brazil in the cataloging of the archives, which I think it's a very important structural work that needs to also be done by institutions, like to try to open up a conversation about how to even interpret, how to catalog, how to address these archives nowadays, And yeah, so I think we are very responsible on trying to move forward the field of conversation, but also the institutional practices in that sense.
Well, that's what that's what I meant with the image is not an image anymore alone. It needs that other part. As Thyago, responded with the project inviting the Yanomami community to organize an archive, and they don't have the notion of an archive, history, even collecting. They don't know anything like that. And your case of Maya Godet, working with the LGBT, with the transsexual community in Mexico, and bonding, creating a relationship over the years, more than a simple image. So my point is that we have to go to the archive, but in which terms? In which terms do we build or create a community? In which terms do we? And that's my last question. And then we will open to the audience to please formulate your questions.
I think we have the question, but not the answer. Because I think, really I learned more with the Yanomami about photographic ethics than with all the history books on photography I've learned. So it's really like, I think we have a question, and I'm not sure we know where we're going to get to. So we're open to learn from the other part and, try to find a common ground or something that we can have dialogues and understand our differences, our, violent differences. So I really think it's like just really opening up the conversation in a very honest and horizontal way, in a true sense of openness, to really be prepared also to kind of challenge your most stubborn convictions and, also the structures of power that sustain all these archives. So I think this is the real challenge that we face in terms of if we really want, photography to become something else and, move into a new century and a new understanding, I think it's going to be something that we'll be together. We don't know exactly how to do. I don't think there's any kind of let's listen to this or do that and etc. I think it's really like a relation that we're going to build together by recognizing ourselves and learning to work together and opening up to new ideas. And I was just going to mention, because there's a lot of criticism on documentarian photography, but we know, for instance, the genocides that were submitted in this world, and I think some of the most important, shocking images of our time are very documentarian images. So I truly believe that even if we're here in a fair talking about artistic invention and visibility, etc., there is something that is just documentary photography is just unbelievably fundamental and important and commanding our lives in a way that I think more important than ever. Maybe it's very present, and we can see those images, we can feel those images, and they're everywhere in a way that we never thought we were being able to access. So I truly believe this. It's as powerful as ever.
Yeah, also I believe that there's in this notion of reportage, you know, it's like visual essays that photographers have done for like throughout the 20th century and 21st century, also allows you to have, and many of them have developed into books, you know, photo books, that allows a different narration and temporality to try to understanding what is developed through the images and through like the sequence and the narration that is conveyed in those projects. Because, and I think this is even more important, this sort of temporality of approaching another reality that is not yours or your own life or like context, because nowadays, you know, of course I use Instagram and everything, and we are all like influenced by, you know, the digital image and the fastness of the digital world, the speed, and but it's just, I really, really appreciate this moment of someone that has developed a relationship with a community for 10, 20, 30 years, like Claudia Andujar, for example, that you know, of course, her work really, really well, Thyago, because you have curated major exhibitions about her work, and that this allows to, in these very long-term and committed relationships, this allows also that something is produced throughout that sort of ethical commitment to a certain community or group of subjects, you know. And because it allows to kind of refine this relationship and this like sort of outcome, that the images are the outcome of the relationship, they are not the end of the relationship. And in that sense, I believe there's really interesting examples that we can think of that have developed this long-term commitment to certain groups, communities, and that have allowed us to rethink their roles, because sometimes this notion of, for example, this very you know, Bourdieu from Bordeaux, you know, the sociologist, French sociologist, about marginalized people, actually, because they are they don't have material access, they cannot access beauty or a sense of beauty or a sense of tenderness, because they live in a sort of like a absolute precariousness. And now I'm completely against this notion, and that's what I think many photographers have giving us the possibility of understanding how, in a very different way, emotions play a role in these marginalized communities, interactions, power, hierarchies, and that it's like in a much more complex way. And I really think nowadays we do need, and that's the role of photography, of art in its way, and of us as curators, try to convey and to display for a broader conversation, the complexity, the frictions that of the world and the relationships we are immersed into.
Is what Jean-Luc Godard called presque en image. It's not an image, it's something else. It's something that it's not completed. Therefore, you need to complete it with something else. Well, I want to open to the audience. Yeah.
I think she has.
Thank you. I have two questions for Thyago. I'd like him to elaborate a bit more about this work with the Yanomamis. Are you bringing them to IMS? Are you taking the photos to them? How does it work in practice? And also about artificial intelligence that you mentioned in the work of one photographer. I'd like to know if you think it's a threat or it opens new possibilities for photography.
Just the last part of the question, if it
opens new possibilities.
If it's a threat or if it's
a threat, yeah.
Okay. I mean, the relation with the Yanomami is still starting, so I'm not sure how this will work. I've been working with Claudia Andujar and the Yanomami and the archive for the past 10 years now, and it's something we're building together. I did a big show. I learned a lot through the show. I changed the show many times, and the show toured to, I think, 10 different places, and it's just finishing in Colombia now. And now it's coming back to Brazil, and the archive is coming to IMS. So I'm starting to build something that I don't know exactly where. There are many challenges. You know, the Yanomami live in the very deep part of Amazonia. They very few people speak Portuguese. It's really difficult to access, for us to have contact, for them to come to a city in São Paulo. There are different challenges that we're gonna figure out. But I think if there is hope for Claudia's archive to be really, and I think that's what she wishes, to be really active and not just become a historical piece of, a piece of history, to be something that's present in the current time, that is effective in the current time, that is still speaking to the current time, is to really bring together the people to whom it relates to and who need these images to be alive. I think there is a clear understanding also from the Yanomami, which originally didn't allow photography to exist, that those images keep them alive. It's a sort of visibility that they can spread and can use in other parts of the world to protect them in the deep forest. So it's we're thinking of doing like workshops and bringing people in, bringing people there, and figuring out. I don't know. It's really. I think we're opening a new chapter that will maybe take a long time. I mean, regarding artificial intelligence, I don't want to guess. Everything is so open. It's still in motion. But I'm very interested in to see how this, how we can really use technology to re-understand the archive. And I'm working with with two young artists that are, revisiting the iconography. I think they're looking at missing gaps in the archives, like images that don't exist. And why those images don't exist? Is it because these realities didn't exist, or was it because there were structures of power that erased those images or didn't allow those images to exist? And I think these artists are trying to face these questions and bring new possible narratives for the archives that will probably enhance our understanding of those archives. So it's really, I find it very interesting and very challenging, and really honestly desired for an honest desire for those images. It's not just like playful technique, but it's really like I need those images for my own personal history. And how can those images exist? How can I make them happen and be real? So let's see where it goes.
I want to say something regarding that. Recently, I went to a talk by Seva Calfuqueo, who's a trans indigenous artist. I don't know how to describe his identity, but he's from Chile. And he was talking about the use of technology in those communities, because people think that if you're a Yanomami, you don't use in artificial intelligence. But I think many people in the so-called global South are using technology in that sense to reconfigure the archive, as you said. And I think the real threat for the Yanomami will be the evangelical churches more than in artificial intelligence. I don't know if you agree, but anyway.
Well, in terms of image, maybe, yeah. The real threat to them is us. It's like we live in the cities. It's the money, the accumulation of money, capital, the gold that are in the banks in Europe. This is the real threat. I mean, their lives are, in a certain way, indexed with the price of the gold in the financial market. When any crisis come up and the price of gold rises, the land is invaded, they are destroyed. So they're absolutely connected to the core centers of capitalism in Europe. And this also has to do with artificial intelligence, the computer technologies, the energy, everything that we think is modernization and development is actually a mass killing of people that we don't see. And they need to be visible to protect themselves. So this is really the paradoxical relation that we need to think a little bit more through.
Hi, thank you so much for your panel. I hope I can get this right. So if we understand that photography is both exploitative and ambiguous, right? Then, right, it allows a lot of different readings. So I was really interested in kind of this parallel of Manuel Alvarez Bravo's photograph and like a rereading of that, as well as historically. And I was thinking of the example of The Vanishing Race by Edward S. Curtis, and how the descendants of those photos really use them to have a relationship with their antepasados, right? So their ancestors, thank you. So I was just wondering, like that, are the other photos of Manuel Alvarez Bravo then, are those suggesting her agency, like, I think that's where you were going with that, but I was curious about that and the other kind of parallels of, it's a different genre, right, of looking at the same kind of question.
Yeah, I was going there. I mean, you can see here the photos in downstairs for your, like, you can have a like better look. But yeah, it's showing the agency of the model, you know, that because she's standing and she's like kind of working with another person with the cloth she has on, you know, and she's like in another pose. So these other photographs that belong to the contact sheets, you know, originally, and they were like shots done by Manuel Alvarez Bravo, like show her like kind of displaying other like body movements that I found really intriguing and interesting, you know, and because of course, like if you have, I mean, you can make a very strong critique about this image from a feminist perspective, no, and that I think in different sort of works from in history of art, it has been already made of what represents a woman that it's half naked and, you know, with a male gaze and sleeping, like a sleeping beauty. But what appears when the subject is not represented only through this image, you know? Of course, here we don't know the name of the model, but then if you don't know that this model, that she was a professional, well, not a professional, but maybe a person that used to work with artists and, you know, and that it's not just this image that we know, it's not the only thing that happened there. Of course, the male gaze was present when he probably chose this image to be the one to be, you know, printed and circulated, so to speak. But also you can actually see in the entire you know, work of Manuel Alvarez Bravo and how he approached very different situations and subjects throughout his very long career and work, you know, that it had to do with more of these like kind of yeah, like very particular reality of Mexico and all these like contradictions. And but yeah, of course, I think it's interesting. Not because, of course, he it's not that I want to make him like progressive in that sense, but like we actually can see other things in the images rather of what were the intentions of the author, without making them be like the ones discursively progressive, no, but the other things were happening. That's why I was referring of this notion of resistance, you know, because also in this way, and how in the archive, or this like new sort of archiving, which is non-institutional archiving, like Archivo de la Memoria Trans, and other many archives that are non-institutional. In a way, they also become a tool of resistance and of political resistance for many communities, and they have become very central to photography, even though they were for many time considered as the minor literature, so to speak, no, you know, of photography, you know, without going to the very romantic idea of the, you know, the private archives and so on conversation that has been going on for like decades already, but how do actually these archives have become a political tool also for many communities. And
but you know, Amanda, it's interesting what you're saying about her name is Alice, by the way, Alicia. This Alicia woman who we didn't know about her, but recently the Museum of Modern Art, believe it or not, in New York, they put a label about Tina Modotti's model, who was an indigenous woman. I think she was a Zapoteca, but about her name, her agency, her relationship with Modotti, which you can never discover, you know, through Modotti. And that's the problem of that kind of approach between, you know, the subject and the object and structures of power, inevitably. But I think that changed. Anyway, more questions? Well, thank you so much to my speakers, brilliant speakers. Thank you so much. And for you to come, and Paris Photo for making this possible.
Thank you.